Welcome, everybody. My name is Graham Salinger, the president and founder of Salinger Coaching Solutions. This is PEP for the viewers who haven't seen this show before. PEP stands for Passion, Empowerment, and Perseverance. So I talk to my guests about how they get a pep in their step. In other words, how they have empowered others and how they have gotten a pep in their own step, how they in life have been empowered as well. And I'm very honored to have a guest today who has been a mentor for me in terms of coaching work. My guest today is Henry Yampolsky, JD. Henry is a mediator, a peace educator, a conflict coach, and a TEDx speaker. He serves as the Assistant Director for Education, Outreach, and Conflict Resolution in the Office of Equity and Accessibility at Virginia Tech. Henry has worked with hundreds of complex conflicts around the world and has spoken and lectured at Columbia University School of Law, the National Museum of American Jewish History, and at the Sattva Summit in Rishika. I'm going to mispronounce this one. Henry, how do I help me out here with the India place?
It's Rishikesh, and actually, the image of Rishikesh is right behind me.
Well,
So
there we go. Rishikesh, India. Thank you. He is also president and CEO of the Living Peace Institute, which focuses on conflict resolution, executive coaching, consulting, and leadership development. In that capacity, he has taught leadership, mediation, and conflict de-escalation skills to senior UN diplomats, business executives, and members of the New York Police Department. Henry is also a certified yoga instructor, and he incorporates mindfulness practices into the work that he does. And in fact, I've asked Henry to start us off today by walking us through some mindfulness.
sure. Well, first of all, Graham, thank you so much for inviting me to be a guest on the show. I love what you're doing, and actually even hearing just your introduction and your motto is inspiring for me. So I'm so happy that you are doing that. But in terms of mindfulness, actually, there is mindfulness has become a bit of a dirty word, in that it's used so much and overused, very often by people without really any idea of what it actually is. So mindfulness is actually a misnomer in some ways, because it's not about having our mind full. That's what's happening all the time as it is. Our mind is
Mm-hmm.
full. But it's actually creating some space, some distance between us and the mind. And the idea is creating an opportunity to observe whatever is arising for us. So the little exercise that I invite you and your listeners to join me in doing is called the connected breathing technique. And this is something that I teach as part of my dissolving conflict from within process, and something that I learned from also an internationally renowned author and teacher named Michael Brown, and his book, The Presence Process. So, those listening and you, if you could come into comfortable seated position and just gently close your eyes and begin with noticing your breath. Notice the colder air entering the nostrils. Notice the warmer air leaving. Consciously making the breath deeper. Consciously allowing the breath to move in one smooth, continuous flow. So no pauses, no breaks between the inhale and exhale. One just effortlessly transitions to the other. And as we're breathing, we're going to use a simple four-word English phrase to help us tune in. And the phrase is, I am here now. So as we inhale, thinking of the word I, as we exhale, thinking of the word am, as we inhale, thinking of the word here, and as we exhale, thinking of the word now. I am here now. And let's just stay with that for a few moments. And when you and your listeners are ready, Graham, I invite you to take a deep inhale through the nose. Hold the breath at the top. And as you exhale through the mouth, releasing and then gently blinking the eyes open.
I love that. I love the setting the tone and setting the pace, and I also love this idea of mantra. I often work with clients and have them do a similar thing and have them come up with their own mantra. You're like, I am capable now. I am persevering now. Things like that. It's great to have people individualize those moments as well, because I think the internal conversation is so unique to everybody. So as you think about mindfulness, Henry, can you speak about um, who should do mindfulness, the value of mindfulness in terms of transforming people at an individual level, and then also their capacity to sort of use that in their relationship with other people in their organizations.
So, you see, mindfulness is more than a technique or a meditation. It really is a way we start showing up to life. And for most people, um, we show up by constantly trying to put out the fires, constantly reacting to whatever is happening in our lives. And so, mostly, our focus is outside of us. It's outside of us, and it's on trying to somehow somehow influence what is happening outside of us. And for most people, the way they are and how they feel is highly dependent on what is happening outside of them. So if they are having a nice day, if their boss is nice and friendly to them, they're happy. But if the boss or the partner or their friend had said something to them that they don't like, that's it. Everything goes sour, right? If the weather is outside is nice, again, they're happy. But if it's raining, the weather is not what they thought it should be, they are not so happy. So there is a problem with that. The problem with that is that that means that everyone outside of us has a remote control to us. So everyone could constantly impact the way we are. So if we look at the essence of mindfulness, the essence of mindfulness is that we are absolutely 100% responsible for our inner experience, regardless of what may be happening outside of us, regardless of what calamity or difficulty or challenge may be arising in the outside world. So fundamentally, then, mindfulness is about shifting our focus from outside of us and trying to impact the circumstances outside of us, which very often we have no control over, by tuning within. And then when we start tuning within, we realize that actually, in every situation, we can choose how to respond. We can choose how we are inside. There is a great story about Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu, of course, who's the founder of Taoism. And Lao Tzu, and I'm sure you and your listeners probably have heard of Lao Tzu, very influential being, lived a very long time ago and had a very challenging life. was persecuted, has had all kinds of difficulties. And so, towards the end of Lao Tzu's life, his students gathered around him. And one of the students asked a question, Master, he said, you know, we've been around you and we know you've been through so many challenges in your life, and your life has been so difficult. And yet, you are one of the happiest and joyous people that we know. So, how did you manage all your life with all the challenges and persecutions and poverty and everything you had to go through? How did you manage to stay happy and to stay joyous? And Lao Tzu responded in this way, and he said, every morning when I got up, I asked myself a question. Shall I be joyous today or shall I be miserable? So far, every day I have chosen to be joyous. And this is not just some new age idea. This is not about the attitude of gratitude or and just mentally pumping ourselves up. This is not just about some affirmation. This is about the fact that when we turn inward, even for just a few moments, and start tuning in to our breath, what we start discovering is that we start creating space between whatever is happening on the outside of us, whatever may be happening in the world, and whatever is happening within us. Mm-hmm. And the more aware we become of that inner experience, the more we realize that actually we can change it, we can shift our inner experience again, irrespective of circumstance. And that's the key to true freedom. If no matter what is happening in the outside world, within us, we can be joyous, happy, peaceful, then that's truly the key to being absolutely free and not dependent on the outside circumstance.
Okay, so it's about an intentionality of a mindset, and so when I think about sort of mindset shifts and belief systems and working with my clients, sort of the story you told about him, and you brought up the fact that he didn't have an easy life, and he was able to have that mindset set despite hardships. So one of the things that I said I work through with my clients is creating this thing that I have called the empowerment zone, getting them in the zone. And when they're empowered, what that looks like is that they're able to really hone their passion. They're empowered to figure out what their calling is and their purpose is. And then really the important thing is making sure they can get through hard times and persevere when there are challenges that get in the way of those successes that they're already leveraged for. Can you talk a little bit about perseverance, what that means to you in your experience? You've worked with a lot of different types of organizations that have faced multiple different types of challenges, either institutionally or within conflict contexts. But in your coaching work and your facilitation work, what has been effective in making sure that organizations persevere through some of those difficulties?
So in many ways, perseverance is like digging a well. Now, if we wanted to dig a well and get to water, if we start digging a little bit here, and then we move on to the next spot, and we start digging a little bit there, and then next one and next one. So we're going to have a lot of holes, but won't be anywhere near water. So the idea of perseverance is if we pick a direction, then we have to stick with it. And we have to stick with that for a while. And when we start going down that direction, the mind may tell us a story that, hey, this is not working, this is the wrong way, this is too hard. But if we stay the course, then we're going to get to water. So the importance here, the importance that I found in my own life, the importance that I found in many, many organizations that I've worked with. It is picking a path and then sticking to it.
Mhm.
Again, while knowing that sometimes that path is going to feel like the wrong path. It's going to feel, the doubt is going to come. But if every time there is doubt, we're going to change the path, we're just going to keep walking in circles. So if we're interested in getting somewhere, if we're interested in getting to water, if we're interested in getting to nourishment, if we're interested in changing our life, what's important is picking a teacher, picking a direction, and then sticking with it. I in my travels in India and all over the world, I've met a lot of people who I started calling they're kind of spiritual samplers. They're going to different teachers. They're going from coach to coach and teacher to teacher and tradition to tradition and yogi to yogi and retreat to retreat. And they have a lot of information, but they're not going through any sort of transformation, because what's happening is they dig a little bit here and there, and they read this book and that book and saw this teacher or that teacher, but there is no perseverance with any one practice, with any one teacher, with any one coach. So they're kind of keep wandering and wandering, and they're interesting people to talk to for a while, but there is no substance. There is no personal transformation that is happening within them.
Mm-hmm. And so, in your experience, what has created a shift to get people from being sort of the ones that survey and get those information to being people that are actually able to be transformed?
So in my experience, and this is both with people and with organization, it takes four things. And these are really four pillars, as I discovered in my own life, of transformation, both individual and organizational. And these four pillars are tuning inward, observation without evaluation, expansion, and exploration. So tuning inward, this is whether we're talking about individuals or whether we're talking about organizations. One of the most important aspects of personal organizational transformation is shifting that focus from outside of us within. And in my own experience, in my own life, I found that it is critical, absolutely critical, to have a consistent tuning in practice, whether it's meditation, whether it's contemplation, whether it's the combination of these two. And when we're talking about organization, it is the practice of tuning inward with the organization, of connecting with the organization's mission, of creating the vision, of asking questions and not be so quick to try to come up with an answer. Being willing to sit with the discomfort of not knowing the answer, of discomfort of sitting with a difficult question. So I find that's one of the most critical aspects of personal transformation, and that is that willingness to go within and to confront both beautiful aspects of who we are, both as individuals or as organizations, and be willing to sit with the ugly aspects of who we are, and be willing to sit with everything. Which brings me to the next point, and that is observation without evaluation. So if we really notice, just about everything that we say is a conclusion of some sort. It's a label of some sort. It's a judgment of some sort. Right? If it started raining right now, many of us would say, well, the weather is bad today. Well, no, the weather is not bad. It's just raining. Who are we to make such a broad judgment, such a broad conclusion, right, about the weather? Yes, maybe there's something we don't enjoy. That doesn't make it bad. So learning to observe life without evaluating it. Jiddu Krishnamurti, who's one of the great Indian philosophers, talked about observation without evaluation as being one of the highest forms of intelligence. Of course, you work in the world of conflict resolution, and I think observation without evaluation. One of the purest forms of observation without evaluation is listening, practicing active listening. Something, of course, that we do in mediation, something that we do in many of the restorative practices. So, observation without evaluation means we start to learn to listen to ourselves. We start to learn to listen to other people without trying to put an evaluation, without trying to put a judgment, a conclusion on that experience. And when we start translating it to life, instead of constantly trying to come up with a conclusion, with a way to somehow confine and define life into few words that we came up with, we start to see life as it is. So a challenge comes, it doesn't have to be good or bad, it's a challenge. We just are able to respond to it. So next one is expansion. And expansion means we start letting go of some of the conclusions that we have about life. You know, our knowledge is always going to be limited. Our ignorance is limitless. There's always going to be more what we don't know than what we know. So one practice I invite to my clients to adapt, many people I work with, is instead of saying any version of I know what this person is about, I know what the situation is about. Instead of saying that, saying I am open. Because what happens the moment we say I know? Well, we're closed, nothing more to learn, right? If I say I know you as a person, I know everything there is to know about you, well, what's there to learn? What's there to discover? But if I say, actually, I don't know anything, I am open, this creates a very profound, a very fundamental shift. And then the final aspect of transformation is exploration. So most of us walk through life or ride through life kind of on rails that are defined for us, and these are rails of our identity, right? So something we pick, and our identity is really all aspects of our identity are really accumulations, right? If we take the physical aspects, this body is an accumulation. It's an accumulation of food. It's an accumulation of genetic material that we have accumulated over time, right? Through our ancestors and so forth. If we take the content of our mind, it's an accumulation. It's an accumulation of thoughts, ideas, judgments, things we read in books, things our parents told us, things we see on TV, and so forth and so on. Well, if we are consistently just staying within the boundaries of those two rails, there is no exploration. So exploration means that we actually start connecting with dimensions that are beyond what we know, that are beyond our experience. And ultimately, if we really want to get to the true meaning of mindfulness, we start connecting with dimensions that are beyond our accumulations. And through that, we start realizing that there is a distinction between what is ours and what is us, right? So this body, this mind, all the things, education, degrees, etc., all the things we've accumulated, these are all ours, but that is not us. So it requires the willingness to explore requires this fundamental shift from being constantly defined by what we know and what happened before. So what happens is we're just projecting the past experiences on the future, to saying I am willing to explore, and I don't know how this is going to turn out, but unless I try something new, I'm just going to continue to get what I have always gotten.
Sort of a humility combined with curiosity, sort of those last two. So of those four pillars, in your experience, have there been specific ones that leaders of organizations have the most trouble with, in terms of maybe they're resistant to it, or they're are there some adaptability issues of those four?
Well, I think the one people resist the most is the first one, and that is tuning inward.
Mm.
Because that's a fundamental shift from the way we're conditioned to live our lives, from constantly looking outside of us for a solution, right? Every time we turn on the TV, every time we listen to a politician, every time we read a book, they're telling us the solution is there. The solution is if we get this car, or if we get this new consultant, or if we get something else. So everything in our culture is telling us that we need to look outside of us. And it takes immense maturity and, frankly, sometimes exhaustion to say, you know what? I've been looking outside of me or outside the organization, and I've had this consultant and that consultant, and we've got this program and that program, and none of this worked. So, guess what? We need to fundamentally shift and change how we approach it. And that fundamental shift is starting to look within. And then once that happens, everything else begins to change. And then we start observing more than about evaluating. And then we start expanding from a limited identity very often to something that is more inclusive. We start being willing to take risks. We start to explore. Mm-hmm. So then it becomes almost that chain reaction that brings about the other steps.
Okay. Yeah, I want to take a step in a little bit of a different direction. You were talking earlier about, when we talked about perseverance, you're talking about people finding their paths and their way, and I used the word purpose in my description of what that looks like. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about, like I read your resume at the beginning, but can you tell our viewers a little bit about how you got on the path that you're on? Because you weren't always doing this amazing conflict resolution and peace building work. You had been an attorney kind of in the corporate world. So can you walk our viewers through Henry's journey in terms of finding the right path and pursuing your passions?
Right. Well, first, I think we have to get away from the idea that there is the right path. That there is paths that we all take, and I think we have to let go of the idea, kind of the pursuit, that there must be just the right one, the only one, the unique one for us. For me, this path has had several transformative events that really shifted my thinking and shifted the way I approached life. So the first event happened in 1994 when my family and I came as refugees from Ukraine, place you have some familiarity with. And in many ways, that was a very shocking experience. We came as refugees. We came to a small town in Pennsylvania, or medium-sized town in Pennsylvania, Scranton. And that was a very, very difficult experience. We didn't speak English. We didn't really understand the ways people lived here. And so I thought that if I become, my parents were really struggling, and I was 14. And I thought, well, if I become a lawyer and I could, serve and represent people like my parents, that would really be very impactful, and that would change and end up create, great experience for me and great experience for people like my parents. And so I went to law school. I became a lawyer. I represented a lot of people who were very poor and who were very, very much at the bottom throngs of the society, people who, restaurant workers and immigrants. And in many ways, the work was rewarding, and I enjoyed my clients, and I enjoyed the social justice aspects of this work. But then the process, more and more, it was becoming clear to me that the process that I was engaging in was quite violent, and that even simplest disputes, simplest cases, took years to resolve, There was so much paper chasing, and it was very laborious and lengthy. And increasingly, I was becoming more and more frustrated with this process, and saw this process as really being very harmful to human relations and to um, ultimately human connection. And then through a series of, as I came kind of to this point in my life where I was beginning to feel very, very frustrated and very unclear as to, I've invested so much of my time and energy into becoming a lawyer. So now what? I don't really like it. So where do I go from here? And then through a series of very powerful, transformative events, I ended up in India, where my wife and I stayed in a yogic ashram, and we became yoga and meditation teachers, and I really got exposed very deeply to some very, very profound teachings on nonviolence, and really my world has shifted, because um, more and more I started to turn within, and I started to experience. Um, I stopped really experiencing myself just being limited to the identity that was very important to me at that time, and that identity of a lawyer. And so, after spending time in India, and getting really involved in the teachings of nonviolence, the work that I was doing more and more felt very violent to me.
Mm.
And eventually I just could no longer do it. And also it became clear to me that I have to put my money where my mouth was. If I continue to stay comfortable, and stay in a comfortable position, which was very convenient and comfortable as a partner at a law firm, well, I'm not getting anywhere. And so that's where I decided to switch and change. Initially, I started a law practice that was dedicated to peacemaking. That was not a very smart business decision. I simply could not make it work as a business. But then, through some of the other work that I started doing, work with individuals and organizations, I shifted more into consulting, and coaching, and working with conflicts, and working with individuals, working with organizations. And then from there, this opportunity came up at Virginia Tech, that really had combined all the things that I was passionate about. So civil rights, education, um, opportunity to be kind of an internal coach within an organization, opportunity to do very sophisticated organizational development, an opportunity to teach, an opportunity to be in a space that is curious, intellectually curious, open. And so that was the perfect opportunity for me.
If we go back to the starting of your shift from the being the lawyer to sort of the piece work, because you weren't you didn't like the structural violence that you're involved in as a lawyer. I'm sure there are a lot of people who probably could identify with being in a job that they don't like, and or not that they don't like, but that they maybe isn't necessarily serving the purpose that they wish to be following, but they're comfortable, and so they don't want to make a career shift, right? I think there are probably a lot of people who are out there who maybe are in a career, but they don't necessarily make it. They don't see it as a fit, but it's a job that they're keeping for whatever personal or financial reasons. What advice would you give people that could help them think differently or empower them in terms of making career choices? Because it's a pretty bold move to make career choices.
Sometimes when I worked with clients in mediation, and especially with families, families that were restructuring, or couples that were going through divorce, very often I would invite them to do this exercise, and I would have them, look back at the conflict, try to write an essay, or look back at the conflict that they're having today from the perspective of 10, 15, or 20 years from now. So as they look back at this conflict, what 20 years from now, what do they want to remember about it? Do they want to remember that they were able, to spend 3 years to get the couch that was so meaningful to them? Or are they going to remember that, despite their differences, they preserved their relationship, that they were able to be effective partners, that at their daughter's wedding 20 years from now, they were able to sit together and laugh and dance, or were they sitting in separate corners, and not able to speak to each other? So when we talk about people making any major changes in their life, I'd like to start to bring people to the moment actually of their death. In the West, this is not something that is polite to talk about. It's not polite to talk about death, right? But all of us here, all of us will die. All of us, every single one of us will die. So as we are laying at our deathbed, what is going to be important for us? What are going to be things that are truly meaningful for us? What are going to be the things that we regret the most? And I believe it was Albert Einstein who said that we regret the most the things that we never did. So if we are here forever, if we're here forever and we have all the time in the world, then why not? Let's stay in that job that is not fulfilling us. Let's continue doing whatever that we're doing. Heck, we have, hundreds and hundreds of years to do that. But if we realize that we're here for actually a very, very short time, truly our life, and I am now getting into the age, where you're starting to realize that we're pop-ups. It's like this, and this life is gone. So then, what we do matters, right? If we have such a limited time here, then can we? So then there is, of course, there is a cost to making a change. Right? There is a cost to taking a risk. It may not work out. It may not work out the way we think. We may not be as comfortable. And on the flip side of that, there is a cost to not doing that. Right? There is a cost of not doing that. So as we lay on our deathbed, as we are facing, the last moments of our life, what are we going to regret the most? Looking back, what do we want to see our life was like? Do we want to be able to say, you know what, this was tough and challenging, but I took that risk, and you know what, it didn't work out the way I thought it would work out, but it opened a whole new world of other possibilities or opportunities? Or when we're in those last moments, will we be filled with regret to say, well, you know what? I wish I did take that step 20 years ago or 10 years ago. I wish I've done that. And now it's too late. I just regret that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a challenge for individuals and organizations is, I think of success in sort of two ways, right? Successful processes, and also outcomes. And sometimes if the process doesn't work, that means the outcome doesn't work. And I think a lot of times people are laser focused on outcomes and results and measurables, and then sort of like forget about the process to get there. And a lot of things get lost in translation, both a personal level and an organizational level, in terms of finding the right process and the steps, right? And that, like you said, might open up processing things internally and with others, and going through the process lends itself to sort of creativity beyond just sort of the box that is created if all you're thinking about is results and measurables and things like that. So yeah, that's just what I thought when you said that.
Well, and I think there are a couple of important points here that I want to bring up. Whether we focus on results and measurables or on the process, the more important question is not what the result is going to be or what the the process is going to be. Actually, there is a question that comes before that.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, where is it coming from?
Mm.
Where are the results coming from? Are the results coming from the need for the results? Is it coming from fear? Is it coming from some idea of success that someone else has? Where is it coming from? And that's a very, very important, before we take any action. And people often ask me, well, I just really don't know what to do. I'm lost. I don't know what next step to take. I don't know. I'm not clear as to what I want. And so the key in those situations, or sometimes people are clear what they want, but I think before they start doing anything, the important question to ask is why? Why is this important for me?
Mm-hmm.
Why is this important for me? And really, again, be willing to spend some time with the question and not to jump in on the first answer that maybe is convenient or the first answer that pops up. Because if we can really answer that question, why is this important for me? Is this just because I read in a book or in a magazine that that's what I should be doing?
Sure.
Or is there something more to that?
Mm-hmm.
Is there something driving me that is beyond, some idea of should or trying to satisfy or trying to chase?
Mm-hmm.
And this is where we get into the difference between ambition and vision.
Mm.
And this is something that is critical, for individuals and for organizations.
Okay.
Ambition is chasing someone else's idea of what should be. It ultimately is an expression of self-hatred. And if we're chasing an ambition, we're never going to satisfy it, right? Because ambition is ultimately based in comparison. So someone has more than me, whatever way that is expressed, I have to catch them and I have to pass them. Well, guess what? There's always going to be someone who's ahead of us. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Someone who has a little bit more. So that becomes an endless cycle. Vision, on the other hand, this is something that is arising deep within us. It doesn't matter what anyone else has or doesn't has. It's not about comparing us to others. It becomes a natural expression of who we are. Mm-hmm. And it becomes a natural way for us to just create value, mm-hmm. both, again, as individuals and as organizations. So again, to come back to the original question you asked, when we focus on the result or when we focus on the process, we're focusing on the wrong things. Before we focus on either, we have to ask the question why. And we have to be willing to sit with why and what is driving us. Mm-hmm. And we can truly only take the action when what is driving us is not fear, is not some idea that we need to have more than someone else. If we chase that, we're only going to keep coming up empty and empty and empty. It's again coming back to the four things we talked about. Mm-hmm. Tuning in. Why is this important for me? And then the more we start tuning in, the more that vision starts arising from within us that is not driven by ambition.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's success as, when we talk about sort of perseverance and sort of the work that I think also is like when organizations or people are struggling through certain things, then there's so much focus on the struggle, and it's easy to forget about sort of the grand scheme of things in terms of purpose and our purpose that's driving us. So I guess it depends on each client, but what would be your definition, I guess, of success, and what are some success stories that you can speak to in terms of the work that you've done?
So again, I think we have to be careful in general when we talk about success, because in our culture, success is primarily defined based on accumulation,
Right.
right? So if I accumulated more than you've accumulated, I am considered to be successful. But I think that's a very poor definition of success.
Mm-hmm.
I see success as how fulfilling was, this during this short time that I was here. How fulfilling was this short time? Was I able to experience myself as a human being? Did I reach my full potential as a human being? Through my life, did I enhance the life of someone else? It doesn't have to be on any kind of grand scale, but the people, the people that I was with, the people that were with me, friends, colleagues, coworkers, could they honestly say that by knowing me, somehow their life was enhanced? To me, these are definitions of success. Did I actually, in living this life, did I experience this life? Did I experience all dimensions of this life? Was I able to be in charge of my own inner experience? Or did I spend my life constantly in reaction to other things, people, circumstances? So success in my work, the way I define, is not in terms of how much money someone was able to make after speaking with me, or what they could show on a balance sheet or some kind of accumulation that they've got, but how much meaning were they deriving from their experience? Did they realize something about themselves or others that they did not know before? Was their life enhanced in some way through working with me? Were they inspired to serve others in a way that maybe they weren't before, through working with me?
Mm-hmm.
That's how I would measure success. There is a great phrase. It became a meme on social media, but it's truly, it's not how many years.
All right, you're back. Sorry, you were talking about the meme and I cut out right there.
Yeah, so the meme that I was talking, I may be getting it wrong, but it's not about how many years we have in our lives, but how much life we have in every year that we live. How fully do we live? Do we have this experience, this phenomena that is life, or are we spending our life, scrolling through someone else's social media feed as the life is just passing us by?
Mm-hmm. And that kind of provides somewhat of a transition or segue. I think it'd be kind of remiss if I didn't mention the context in which we're speaking. Right, we're in the middle of a global pandemic. There's a lot of tension going on for various reasons, and so what to people out there who are sort of feeling like life has paused or they're stuck or just the structure they're used to, the things that help them in pursuit of their passions and doing things, living their life the way they wanted to. For a lot of people, that's a struggle right now. So building on what you said, what advice would you give to folks who are struggling for various reasons through this pandemic?
What a great question, and as we live our lives, right? When people were going to work, people were complaining, right? My boss is bad. I spend 2 hours in traffic each day. God, I wish I didn't have to do that. Right? Well, now many of us don't have to do that. We don't have a boss that we have to go to work. We're working remotely. We are not sitting in traffic, right? And still we're miserable. And still we're miserable. And actually, we're more miserable now, right? Because before we used to say, we want to spend, gosh, I wish I could spend more time with my wife. Gosh, I wish I could spend more time with my children, with my family. Well, now we're saying, gosh, can I social distance from them? Right? I'm tired of being at home with them. So the problem is not the boss. The problem is not the work. The problem is not the commute.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is not the family.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is not our children. In fact, if everything was taken away, right, and we were just sent to an island where we didn't have to worry about anything, we're just by ourselves, would we be happy? Would we be fulfilled? The answer for most people is no. We would complain, now I am all alone, right? And I have no one to talk to. There's no one around, and I can't believe I am living through that. So the problem is not something outside of us. The problem is not something outside of us. It's not the work. It's not the COVID. It's not the president. It's not his tweet. It's not what's happening in the world. The problem is how we are. And the problem is, as human beings, we have no idea how to be. So then, outside circumstances, whatever they are, whether it's COVID, whether it's what's happening in the world, whether it's injustice, whether it's the politics, gets to influence how we are. So then we are constantly enslaved to outside circumstances. So what advice I can give to people who are staying at home right now? The advice is turn within. Turn within. Learn the practices, whether it's meditation, whether it's just spending some time sitting quietly, not lost in our thoughts, a big difference, but learning to tune within. There's a great book by Austrian psychiatrist and neurologist Viktor Frankl. You probably have heard of the book,
Mm-hmm.
called Man's Search for Meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Viktor Frankl, for some context, as bad as our situations are now.
Right. He was a Holocaust survivor.
Well, more than that, not only was he a Holocaust survivor, he's someone who witnessed his immediate family, his daughter, his wife, not only be subjected to the most unthinkable, inhumane cruelty. He has seen them die. Mm-hmm. He has seen his friends die. Every single day, he was living in a concentration camp, not knowing whether he's going to live through that day or not. And yet, this is a man who, by tuning inward, started discovering that we have an innate ability to respond, to choose our response. This is a man who, living in most inhumane, horrible conditions that none of us could imagine, conditions that, us staying in quarantine and ordering food through our cell phone does not come close to. This is a man who was able to transform himself, and this is the man who was able to say, the meaning that we're looking for, the purpose that we're looking for, the fulfillment that we're looking for is not somewhere out there. It's not going to be found through family, through friends, through work, through anything else that we do. It is only going to be within us. So now, as people have time at home, as people don't have work, what a perfect, and this is not to make light of the challenges that many people are experiencing, but what a perfect opportunity to turn within,
Mhm.
to start spending time in meditation, to start developing a personal practice. And then once people do, they will discover that they're no longer dependent on their circumstances. So they can be perfectly happy at work, they can be perfectly happy at home, or most importantly, they can be perfectly happy at ease when they're just by themselves. When there's no one else, nothing else, they're just by themselves. Most people now, if they're just by themselves, what do? We have to scroll the phone. We have to do something. We have to talk. People get very restless. They're very uncomfortable
Mhm.
being just sitting there. Just sitting there at peace, at ease, without trying to do anything. So now's the perfect opportunity to learn to do that.
So I think I'll finish off, Henry, by asking you what are the most important things that you have learned about yourself when you've tuned in to yourself? What are some things that you would draw out from those experiences for yourself?
You see, the most important thing that I learned is that actually my idea of who I am and the self has started to expand. And this is so transformative, Graham, because if we just see ourselves as this body and this mind, in a way that's very limiting, and in a way it allows us very easily to create an idea of otherness, right?
Mm.
So you are different than me, you look different than me, you're other than me, right? And that created all kinds of ideologies and violence that we're experiencing in the world, where people are perceiving themselves, perceiving others as others.
Mhm.
Through the inner practices that I've been engaging in, what begins to happen is this line of who is me, or what is me, and what is not me, becomes a little bit blurrier. So now just imagine the world we would live in if, instead of seeing ourselves as just, a sack of skin and bones and a collection of thoughts, judgments, emotions, experiences that we've gathered, we start seeing ourselves as something broader than that, as part of something larger than just this sack of skin and bones and this mind that we've gathered. Imagine what kind of world we would live in if the rivers, the environment, we didn't see as being something out there, but actually we saw it as part of us. If we saw other people as part of us, would anyone need to tell us not to kill other people, not to discriminate against other people, not to commit all the unthinkable acts of violence that we as human beings commit against other people? Would anyone have to, if we saw our rivers, if we saw our environment, if we saw our forest as parts of us, would anyone need to tell us to not be as destructive to this environment?
Mhm.
So you see, when we start turning inward and we start engaging in these practices, the very notion of who we are starts to shift and expand and change. And of course, there are side effects. Now, here in the West, people focus on the side effects, and side effects is, you start having more energy. We now there's I think an assumption, right, that people have to live with stress. That stress
Mhm.
is something to be managed.
Mhm.
That's not necessarily that has not been my experience. I don't get. Are there things occasionally that stress me? Yes. Is it something that is part of my, constant everyday experience? Absolutely not. So there's a whole host of side effects and benefits that occur. Now, we in the West very often look at these side effects and benefits as kind of the primary purposes. That's not the primary purpose. That's not the why. The why is we start expanding actual, and this is not some intellectual idea. This is a visceral experience. We start expanding who we think we are beyond this physical form. And then all those other wonderful things happen as well.
Great. Yeah, I guess my final question for you would be: is there anything I didn't ask you or that we didn't talk about that you would like to bring up in terms of your experience and the work that you've done?
Well, just maybe to add on something that I just spoke. You see, one of the I think saddest things that I am seeing now in the world is the fact that people get extremely attached to very limited and limiting identities, and
Mm,
identities that are very rigid. So people see themselves only as Republican, or only as Democrat, or only as liberal, or only as conservative, or only as male, or only as female, or only as coming from this town, or only as Ukrainian, or only as Russian. And that's very, very dangerous, because, and I gave a talk on that a year ago. Our identities are like boundaries. They, in many ways, can define us, like boundaries do, right? But that's what we know, how we know a country. We know Ukraine is Ukraine because of its boundary with Russia and Belarus and other places. So, yes, boundaries can define us, but eventually they start confining us.
mm,
And so one of the biggest issues right now happening, especially as people are staying at home and people are isolated, and social media allows people to isolate themselves into silos where everyone is just like them and everyone thinks just like them. Well, that's a very, very much a precursor to violence. Because once we start creating these identities that are rigid, that are so rigid and so defined, so we have to have someone who's outside of that identity, right? We have to have us and we have to have them, and then we start dehumanizing them, and then we start contempting them. And that's really at the core of the violence, immense violence, both inner and outer, that we're experiencing now in the world. So that is why turning inward and doing some of the practices that we talked about, what begins to happen just naturally is we start expanding ourselves, our sense of ourselves beyond that limited identity that we may have. And even if we can just expand, if we could see ourselves, instead of seeing ourselves, let's say, as just Americans or Ukrainians or Indians, if we could see ourselves again as just humans, citizens of this planet, right? That's a radical shift in perspective.
mm-hmm.
Think again of the impact that would have on the environment, on social justice issues, on the way countries and nations and societies deal with each other. If we don't see ourselves as I'm just Ukrainian or I'm just American, but we see ourselves, I am part of this planet as a whole. I'm part of this humanity as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so um, yeah, what is my follow-up question is what is something in our context now that gives you hope?
Well, what gives me hope is the fact that we're having this conversation. What gives me hope is that there are many people who are asking very profound questions. What gives me hope is that there are more and more people and organizations who are turning inward, who are seeing themselves as not just a separate an island, separate from everything and everyone else, that who can just fly their own little flag, but are seeing themselves more as part of a whole. So it's going to take time, but I'm seeing more and more people, at least starting to question, at least becoming open to this path, at least asking themselves, is there more to life than just accumulation? And that's what gives me hope.
Perfect. And let's end, Henry, as we began with a bookend of another mindfulness practice, if you don't mind. Can you close us out with another practice?
So let's again close our eyes. And the practice we're going to do now is called equal part breath. So as we count to 4 slowly in our mind, let's inhale. Upon completion of the inhale, hold the breath, again counting to 4. At the completion of the hold, exhale as counting to 4, as again counting to 4. And let's hold the breath out as counting to 4. So equal part breath, counting to 4 as we inhale, counting to 4 as we hold the breath, counting to 4 as we exhale, counting to 4 as we hold the breath out. And next time you're inhaling through the nose. Deep inhale, holding the breath for just a moment. And as you exhale through the mouth, gently blinking the eyes open.
All right. Thank you. All right, everybody. Again, this was Henry Yampolsky, and he just thank you so much. I just like to share my gratitude with you for your time today.
Of course, my pleasure.
All right.